And little by little,
So
I'm
I think
learning how to do this. Okay, I believe we are now recording. Learned which.
yeah, it has turned up in the
Yeah, I've got the little light.
Good.
got
Okay.
my little light going. Okay, so I'm going to do the header right now. We're conducting an interview with Beth Neill of Windsor Morris. We are Pat McPherson and Susan Creighton, partners in our business Narratus, which creates archival collections for individuals, families, and organizations. Today's date is March 18th, 2021, and today we are interviewing Beth Neill, a member of Windsor Morris team from England. We are using Zoom to create and record this online interview, and we will now introduce ourselves. I am Pat McPherson with Narratus, and I am located in Montague, Massachusetts.
And
Susan?
I'm Susan Creighton. I'm also with Narratus, and I am here in Greenfield, Massachusetts.
So, Beth, if you can introduce yourself, say where you are speaking from, and one sentence describing, or just something short, describing your connection to the Marlboro Morris Ale.
I'm Beth Neill. I've been a member of Windsor Morris since 1975. We first came to the Marlboro Ale in 1981, and the team has been a succeeding 4 times since then. And I've been there on 3 of those occasions.
And where are you speaking from today?
I'm a village called Chalfont St. Peter, which is about 10 miles away from Windsor.
Chalfont.
Yes. It's a very old name. Kelfundy was a village in the Domesday Book.
Oh my.
Wow, cool. And that's spelled Chalfont?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, super. I'm going to continue with the header. The complete audio interview and this video introduction will become part of the Marlboro Morris Ale Archive, which will reside permanently at the Vermont Folklife Center in Middlebury, Vermont. This is interview number 1 with Beth Neill, in which we will be discussing Windsor Morris's trips to the Marlboro Morris Ale. Yay! End of script. So you just told us a little tiny bit about your history with Windsor Morris, but maybe you can speak just a little bit, Beth, about your history with the team and what roles you played with Windsor Morris.
Right. I was straight out of university when I came down and was living in Windsor. I met someone who was giving me a lift to work, and she said she'd just started this thing called Morris dancing. I knew nothing about Morris dancing. At the time, it wasn't very common. There were certainly very few women doing it, and I had lived up north. So I went to a practice and I got hooked. That was in January 1975. And I've been dancing with Windsor ever since, really. So the team were led very much by a couple called Jenny Joyce and Alan Weir. He was a musician par excellence, and the 2 of them did all the researching for dances and going out and talking to people. In the talking to people, one of the influences, whose name will come up a lot, was Roy Dommett, who was a big help to the team. He had links, as you probably know, with Tony Barrand.
Yep.
And this is probably the kind of way we got a nudge into the ale. So with Windsor, we were a fairly small team of about 8 or 9 women. We just had a male musician, and it was always us. We now have got 2 female musicians, but we've always had a male musician, sometimes 2 if we had a drummer. We also always had a fool, who's been someone called Cherry, who's been with the team ever since the beginning as well. Within the team, I have been, I was secretary for about, I don't know, 15, 20 years, something like that. And when I wasn't that, we do a lot of kind of job sharing on running tours. So I've always been fairly involved one way or another. I had a period where I actually moved away and away because of jobs. At one time I was living 50 miles away or 60 miles away from Windsor, and then it was quite hard to get to practices. But I persevered and I kept getting out to Windsor, and so I'm still there. What's that, 46-ish years later?
So are Julie and Andy. You know, they're really like hanging in there. So when you were starting Windsor Morris, you were a women's team,
Yep.
and what was the context for Windsor Morris among the other English Morris teams in the 1970s?
We struggled quite a lot. The people founding it, Jen and Anne, they ran the local folk club, so they were quite into folk. Alan acquired a melodeon and learned how to play it, and it was a perfect instrument for Morris dancing. They had seen a little bit of Morris. Cherry, who I mentioned, who was our fool, she had also done a little bit of trying to do a bit of Morris dancing with a couple of other friends. It took off when they also got some more women from the local mother and baby group called Prams, and a couple more people from the folk club. So yeah, there was a core of about 8 people. Most of us hadn't seen it, knew nothing about Morris dancing at all. It was quite a struggle because men's teams just were feeling a little bit maybe fragile at the time, and a lot of them were very unsupportive. We did have one contact called Tim Radford, who was with a team called Atterbury, and he was very supportive. Roy Dommett, the man we mentioned, somehow we came across him, and he was brilliant at coming and helping to talk at practice, give us some ideas about how to make interesting figures and dances. We became aware. Sorry, did you? Oh, I thought you asked. Very early on, in about the first year, we became aware somehow that there were other women's teams out there. There was a university team at the University of Reading, which had a small women's team. And one of the members of that, called Jill Coleman, had been at Bath University, which also had a women's and men's teams. They were university teams, led by Betty and Tubby Reynolds. So we began to get very small network, and so we attended in, I think, 1975 or 76, a meeting of the nascent Women's Morris Federation.
Oh.
Which had, I think, maybe 8 or 9 teams at the first meeting. So that was when we first really met other teams and found out what they were doing. We also discovered that there were already approved traditions for women to dance that maybe not many men's teams did, so they didn't mind too much us doing certain traditions. So it gave us a few pointers about what to do, and it gave us the beginning of a network of people, so that we weren't quite so much floundering around on our own. But we went to a folk festival in 1976, and we have a clear memory of the men's teams deliberately looking in shop windows rather than watch our dancing. So the local men's team, Datchet, they again were, one member was very friendly, but generally the team they wouldn't invite us on a tour with them. It was just a very strange way to find out about Morris. But we went to folk festivals, and it gave us a spirit that a sense we had to be very good. We had to be almost better than the men to get accepted. It meant that we got a bit of a reputation for being very serious, because we weren't seen to laugh and fool around, because we were so determined to dance well, to dance high, to dance together, to be accepted as a good Morris team, not a women's Morris team, but just a good team per se. So it took probably about 10 years for us to sort of relax really into just loving what we were doing and feeling a bit more confident in ourselves. And the lead to that is one huge stimulus we got was when we did get the invite to the Marlboro Ale. And I'm thinking this came through Tony Barrand and Roy Dommett, who I think Tony, if no one's already mentioned, Roy was a frequent visitor to America. He was a rocket scientist and managed to go to America on business a lot, and found out all the Morris that was going on when he was over there. He and Tony made contact with one another. Tony obviously is an expat Englishman. He found Roy very helpful because he'd only been dancing a few years himself when he formed the Ale. And Roy was very helpful in notation and in giving him contacts. So my memory is that Tony came over to England, I'm guessing about 1979 or 80. I do have a memory of him, I think, coming to one of our practices, but certainly coming out and talking to us, filming us. And as a result of that, I think in 1980, he invited us for the following year to the Marlboro Ale. And I don't think we realised, well, it was incredibly exciting to go to, an American event. But I don't think we realised it was really quite a kudos event anyway. The Marlboro Ale was handpicked sides. As far as I understood later, Tony was quite selective in the teams he chose. I think he only chose single-sex teams at the time. So we were very excited about a trip to the States, and we sandwiched it with a visit to Ring of Bells, who were in New York. And I think the first time was Muddy River in Boston, where we also met Halfpenny. So they were the other women's Morris teams. And it was very refreshing to us to find out that these women's teams didn't have any issues or hang-ups about going out and dancing in public. There were no men's teams telling them they couldn't do it. No one telling them that it was a male fertility ritual, that we should stay at home and, do the cooking. So the whole of coming to the Ale and American Morris was just a really wake-up call to us about how nice it could be. We hadn't met.
Wow.
Ring of Bells when they came in 79, I think. So they came over, and the other advantage of Windsor is that we are very close to Heathrow Airport. So American teams over the years have almost always got in touch with us to say, well, we're flying into Heathrow, could we spend the first night with you before we do our tour of England? So we've hosted our share of American teams because of that. So we started well. We met Ring of Bells, and they also were great fun, very friendly. And so they were our first port of call when we came over, prior to going up to the Marlboro Ale in 1981. 1981. Well, I think, is that a potty enough?
So my question, you've answered like a lot of my questions.
Okay,
how did you first, come to be involved through Tony and Roy? So we know, a lot of the names you've mentioned, we know Tim Radford. He lives over here now with his, of course,
does, yes.
with our friend Jan Elliott.
Oh,
Um,
Jan, yeah. Well, Jan was Halfpenny, wasn't she, in Boston? So
yes.
again, we met Jan, maybe not the first time we came over because she's quite a lot younger, a few years younger than me. She might not have been with Halfpenny when we came over in 81, but I'm sure I would have met her in 85, if not. So I'm guessing I've known her about that length of time. And then she was over studying in the UK as well. She was at
Yeah.
Goldsmiths, was it? So we met her when she was over here. So yeah, Jan's been a great friend. And yeah, I forgot that link. Of course you know Tim.
Well, I'm really happy to hear that Tim was one of your early supporters. I mean, I'm not surprised, but
yeah,
that is.
yes, we invited to. There was an Adderbury Ale, and we got invited to that fairly early on. So again, that was nice. We were actually invited to, a sort of traditional style event, and again, we had a great time. So
So
Adderbury was very good. Yeah.
I'm fascinated to hear that you were told what dances you could do, and when you first started, the approved traditions you could dance, and what were they?
Gosh, I would have to remember them. Partly, obviously, they would be ones that weren't done by traditional men's teams. So, for example, Bampton was discouraged. There was a team called Chip and Camden, shouldn't do that. There were the ones that was chosen as suitable for women was Ilmington, but Ilmington without galleys, so not like Marlborough Women, who include galleys in theirs. If you know the galley, it's a sort of twiddly knee figure.
Yeah.
So we did the Women's Morris Federation with guidance from Tubby Reynolds, who was Roy Domit's great partner in crime and teaching Morris. Ilmington, Stanton Harcourt. I'm trying to think. Brackley was okay. Hinton, ones that were seen as maybe suitable to women's physique, and not many men's teams did those dances. There weren't any traditional teams doing them. So out of that, Windsor chose to dance. We started with Ilmington, and then we moved on to Badby and Brackley, which were two traditions that at the time very few teams danced, or maybe did one dance from it. So we wouldn't be told we were doing it wrong because there weren't any big examples out there.
Mm-hmm.
Apart from Brackley Jockey, which everybody did, we weren't really treading on anybody's toes by what we chose to do. And so most of the women's teams were doing the same thing. They had a certain repertoire of dances that were researched. There was a research group in the Women's Morris Federation, and they looked into dances that women could do without prejudice, if you like.
Susan, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go on.
Susan, you had a question?
Yeah, Beth, I'm wondering, was this a time when Windsor, did they have just one tradition that the team danced, or did you eventually have a dance repertoire of dances from several different traditions?
We chose deliberately because Alan and Jen had gone around a lot. They were very aware that traditional teams would only do their own repertoire of probably about 15 to 20 dances. And they felt that a lot of the ring teams that were around at the time, they would do maybe 2 dances from each of about 10 traditions. But what they felt was everything got diluted. So everything looked a bit the same. So they would stand up and say, this is a dance from Wilmington, this is a dance from Headington, this is a dance from Bampton. But because they were all, one team was dancing all these different traditions, they got a bit diluted. And so the team didn't necessarily have its own style as much. This was our feeling. So Jen and Alan decided very early on that we would just do 2 traditions. which were Badby and Brackley, both from Northamptonshire. At the time, so they weren't danced very much by any other teams. There was a little bit written in the Morris Bible, which is called the Black Book. Not many, which also gave us the ability to make dances up, which we did. So again, we couldn't be told we were doing them wrong because we had chosen some tunes. We chose the stepping, the basic stepping, and then we made up our own choruses. We put our own style onto it. And when we danced out, we prefer to just say, this is a dance called Bow of London City. We don't do like a lot of the men's teams were doing, which is say, this is a dance from Brackley, this is a dance from Badby. We would just say, this is a Windsor dance. And we wanted that to be our style. So we just did 2 traditions and tried to make a very definite style so that people would immediately see us and say, oh yeah, that's Windsor style. We have since added one more tradition on, which is an adaptation of Minnesota upon Minneapolis, which became Minnesota upon Charles, which was taught by Tim Radford at a workshop in Wantage, run by Roy Dummett. It's now called Windsor on Thames, but we quite liked the tradition when Tim taught it about 15, 20 years ago. And so we adapted it again to a sort of Windsor style, but it actually evolved in America and we nicked it and put our own song.
I have to tell you, Beth, this is so funny to me because my former husband danced with the Commonwealth Morris men who were team for a while in the Boston area. And they decided early on that they wanted to dance Minneapolis. And so they stole it from the Minneapolis women's team and they danced it and adapted it. So it's delightful to hear that it made its way back across the Atlantic and got adapted yet again. So marvelous.
Yeah. Oh yeah, a Commonwealth were just fabulous. We just thought they were amazing. Yeah.
Oh man. Okay.
Where did I get? Yeah, so we just did 2 traditions and very much in our own style. And the other thing we tended to do, which was seen as maybe a bit arrogant or elitist, we chose not to do masked dances when we went to events. Because what would happen is all these events, all the teams would get up and do a sort of version of a dance that they knew, but everybody did it slightly differently. So our feeling at the time was it didn't look very good. And there was also a dance off called Bonnie Green Garters, which again, in our early days, we said we don't do that. And then I think maybe coming to the Marlboro Ale might have broken our resolution on that, because I think we felt as visitors, we would have to go along with our hosts. So I think we actually broke with tradition and did Bonnie Green Garters when we came to the first ale, but that might be wrong. I think that's, we broke our rules for that.
I'm thrilled to hear all this. It's so exciting to hear this early history of, men and women and traditions and striking out on your own. And a lot of what you're talking about has been echoed from our listening to Julie and Andy, and how important they felt it as well to dance really strongly.
They were wonderful. I mean, one thing I think we felt when we did come over was there was a slight difference in attitude, I think, to the way Americans approached Morris dancing. I think they approached it a bit like a sport, a bit more than I think at the time British teams did. They were not professional exactly, but very thorough, very and this might just be the teams we saw, because we saw the ones that Tony let us see. Very, very attention to detail, really thinking about kit. So that certainly the teams we were aware of, we felt the Americans were very committed to their performances, and they could teach some of the British teams at the time something about performance and commitment. I think things have changed a lot now. I mean, we're talking back 40 years, but at the time, that I remember was one of the things we noticed, that the American teams were so, yeah, almost professional about the way they danced. You know, very, very slick, very tight, nice kit, which some of the more traditional ring Morris teams, they were all for the pub social aspect of the dancing, and saying it was carrying on a tradition. But there wasn't the same effort in jumping high and dancing together and making a really good show of it. So I wouldn't say that's necessarily the case now, but that was how we felt when we came over those 40 odd years ago.
So having seen that style of dance, and you're right, it was very intentional that they were inviting the teams who either danced that way or who were new teams that they wanted to give, you know, this experience to, of seeing the teams that dance that way. So when your team came and saw this, do you feel like you took something home with you which affected your dancing from then on?
I think we felt a bit more confident about going back and thinking, you know, women's teams can be good, because we were still having the problem that some festivals wouldn't invite women's teams to dance on the big stages. Women's teams were still a bit of a step too far. So yes, being at Marlborough and getting that support and people telling us, wow, you guys are amazing. That was the other thing that we found very refreshing, was that in England you get up, and even now you will still get a lot of audience that don't really want to know what you're doing, and mostly the people that ask what you're doing are foreigners who want to know what country you're from, and we have to say, well, we're English, this is actually English dancing. Whereas when we were in the States, we were and people would just come up and say, oh gee, you know, I really like what you're doing. And that was tremendously refreshing to us, because we hadn't had that sort of, unless we were maybe at a folk festival, if you were just in a town, very, very few people would come and say, I like what you're doing, what is it, tell me about it. Only tourists.
So interesting.
So that was actually a really nice thing that we took back with us, I think, the feeling that people could be interested in what we were doing. And yeah, I think we came back invigorated from our trip and more confident.
So it's interesting that the way you described how the team came together was people who had not a lot of previous experience of or knowledge of Morris dancing. And so, you know, you didn't come from, as a team, with deep roots.
No, definitely
And
not.
so did that evolve over time? I mean, everything in North America did not have deep roots.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And so you coming from like the home country,
Yeah.
but at the same time, you didn't have deep roots either.
We didn't know. I mean, apart from what would it be, maybe 4, Jen, Allen, Cherry, and Maz, who are folkies. In fact, our team was fairly unusual in that we didn't necessarily come from a core folk background. As I say, there were
Right.
B groups. I'd done a lot of Scottish dance in my time, so I knew basic figures and reels. So I understood the basic figures of Hayes, but that was Scottish dance. I'd still never seen Morris. So yes, it was. We were very much forming our own roots as we came along. I think it's very different now when there's more Morris around for people to see, to have a sense of what the traditions are. You can see a lot of Morris dancing now, but when in the 70s, it just wasn't something you came across. So it was alien to all of us. So yes, we did form our roots. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe now that you're not under such scrutiny from the men, it might be easier for the newer dancers who are women to appreciate, the long tradition behind this dance without coming in conflict with it, you know? Yeah.
I mean, we've not slightly envious of the new teams that are starting up, because they just have none of that barrier to being accepted. We've got a fabulous lot of young dancers in our team now, but none of them have had to go through, except some of them are daughters of people who were around in the 70s, so they know from their parents what sort of prejudices happened. But a lot of the ones we've got, they find it quite alien. We did actually, there was a TV crew came and spoke to us about 2 years ago, and they were quite amazed when we were saying these are the sort of hurdles we have to go through. And our younger people were saying, we just never had to go through any of this. We just turn up and we dance and we have a good time, and we've never had to do this fighting to be accepted. So we were just forming and now we have formed a very good basis, and Windsor are still recognised as one of the strong teams, women's teams in Britain, and we will be seen as an example of a team to look at, because we do things thoroughly. So we've still got a good reputation.
Yeah. I'm going to go back in time a little bit now again, and maybe collect some dates and let's see. We're wondering, for the record, how often Windsor came to Marlborough?
Right, I've jotted my note. Hang on. Right. First time we came was 1981. We then came again in 1985. We then came in 1991. Then Windsor came in 1995, but I didn't, because I just had my son. I wasn't up to bringing a small child to a Morris Ale. And then I've got 2003. So that's 5 times in all that the team have been there.
Oh, and each time did your whole team manage to come?
Oh gosh, no. The first time I think most of the team came, but we were quite a small team, so maybe 9, 10 dancers. We actually developed a rule fairly early on that we would prefer not to do big events with less than about 10 dancers, because Morris dancers are prone to injury, and if you go away, especially for a foreign tour, and you crop your ankle on the first day, it spoils your holiday. It also makes it harder for everybody else. So we normally try and go away with 9 or 10 people, because you need 6 for a dance usually. The 1985, I think we had quite a big contingent. 1991, I think, was even bigger. But again, not the whole team, but we probably brought about maybe 14 dancers. It was quite a big group. Then 1995, I think it was a slightly smaller group, maybe about 10 or 11. And then again in 2003, we had a big group then that came. But we had to finance ourselves. We've never been able to generate sponsorship or anything. Mm-hmm. The way Windsor works, we do have partners, some of whom are Morris dancers, but on the whole, the Windsor ethos has been very much it's our hobby, it's not necessarily a family team. There are some teams. I don't know if you might be interviewing some. Great Western came the same year that we did in 2003, I think. And they're a family team. So when they go away, they usually bring all their partners and families with them. Windsor tend not to be such a family team. So unless it's a festival and you get tickets, we would tend to go away without partners. So when we went to the ale at Marlborough, I think on maybe the 1991, I think 2 people brought their partners along with them. But generally we are a cohesive team. We don't need to have all the partners along as well, which makes for easy accommodating when you go somewhere, because they're not having to put up lots of couples and children. So yeah, so never really less than 9, I wouldn't have said. And dancers. And then we also had Alan, our musician, on, I think, on all those trips. We had a drummer with us, I think, on all the trips. And then we've had a fool, Cherry, the lady I mentioned before, who has been with us right from the start. So there are supernumeraries, the fool and 1 or 2 musicians. So we've normally travelled around by minibus. It's required quite a lot of planning when we've gone.
Yeah. So when you got to the Marlboro Ale, let's say the first or second times you were there, did anything surprise you about the ale?
Oh gosh. I suppose the venue was wonderful because we were lucky enough to be put up in the college dorms. So that was great fun. It was I seem to remember put it about rooms of 4 or something. So it was a bit like being back being at boarding school or something. We were all in our little dorms. We were incredibly well looked after. I think it was just refreshing. Everybody was so friendly, so supportive. I do remember being surprised by the amount of contra dancing that went on, because we didn't know about contra dancing. And in the evening, we think, oh, what are they doing? Don't know how to do that. What else?
Can I ask a question?
Go. Yeah.
Were there ales, as in multi-day events, happening in England at this time as well?
I don't think we called them ales so much. Ales, we do have ales, but let's see, Seven Champions used to have an ale for a weekend, but usually only not include, because Marlborough was Friday night, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, wasn't it?
Yes.
Didn't we? We danced Monday as well. In England, yeah, people do have weekends, but they don't call them ales. So they do have weekends, but maybe not as many. Probably just inviting 1 or 2 teams. So you might have a total of maybe 4 teams, mainly for the logistics of accommodation and having tours in town centres, the number of teams you could have. So Seven Champions do probably the closest approximation, where we all stay in a village hall and camp, and they have about 6 or 7 teams and coach travel going around different villages. So similar, but at the time there weren't many things like that. It was all, still evolving in the 70s and 80s. Even ales were, I think, new to quite a lot of people. The ale I remember going to was one at Adderbury, which Tim was involved in, but that was just an evening thing. It was just an assembly of about 3 teams, and we all just danced inside, and it was fun, but it wasn't one of these big events.
I
think people might have called it something different, but nothing quite on that scale.
We've been curious about whether there would have been similar kinds of events going on in England, and if so, how were English different from any American events that were going on. But as you said, I think even ales in the US were pretty new at the time, and this was all just evolved. Yeah. This began as Andy and Tony's party and just grew from there. So
yeah. I mean, the one traditional ale, which Rhett has probably talked about anyway, was at Kirtlington, which was the team he danced with. And Kirtlington, when they formed the revival team, also revived a traditional called the Lamb Ale. But it was a single day. It's a fabulous day, and we love being invited to it because it's still going. In about the second Sunday of June, something like that. And they invite maybe a dozen sides, but it's just walking around the village. There is a sort of campsite the night before with a ceilidh, but not the scale of Marlborough. But it's a lovely day. Each team does a show dance, so similar theme, and then we just do walking tours around the village of Kirtlington, and we do a procession to the church and a procession away from the church. So another, much a microcosm of what goes on at Marlborough. So I suppose New Fame would be equivalent to the dance in the school. So, and it's a lovely event, which was revived. So no one's quite sure what happened the first time round, but Rhett will tell you all about that anyway.
Okay. So in talking to Julie and Andy, especially Julie, because I think she was down there, a lot of her memories are about what she calls the field. Does that spark any memories with you?
I can only remember the field might have been it. I can remember the college. Well, I suppose it's the grounds of the college. That was probably it. The only bit I remember was a big assembly before the Saturday morning, and there's this, you sort of assembled all the way up the hill or slope, and all the teams were assembled, and there was this big drum. Someone played this amazing big drum, and we all kind of just joined this procession, which was just magical. And that was just so exciting. This big procession with the drum in front. And I have funny memories of dancing at an old people's home with all the old people were inside the home, and we just danced outside for it. But it's a traditional stop on one of the tours. You dance outside the old people's home and they watch out. So yeah, there were some lovely moments.
That still happens.
Does it?
Yes. Yeah.
So Susan is a Morris dancer. I am an observer. Right. I grew up doing Scottish country dancing, and I was very, very careful of my knees and my feet. And when I saw Morris dancers jumping up and down on the pavement, I decided, I don't want to do that thing.
When I first joined Windsor in '75, I briefly had to move because I was made redundant, and I joined another team called Meridian. Didn't find it very good, and managed to work my way back to Windsor by dint of getting lots of lifts. But by the time I got back to Windsor, after a gap of about 8 months, I was told I was too balletic, because they'd decided by then what they wanted, a really sort of chunky style. But because I'd done Scottish dance all my life, I was used to, if you know Scottish dancing, you're dancing sort of on your toes.
Yeah.
And I had to very much sort of unlearn my Scottish dancing style to get more beefy. I mean, you could still be graceful, but there was a slight difference in the flow. But you're right, my knees have survived. My hip hasn't. I've got a new hip. But my mum insists that was Morris dancing, but I got back to Morris dancing, so it's okay.
Interesting.
But yeah, Morris is a bit more poundy. Yeah.
Yeah. Susan?
I was the opposite of Pat, because I got the Northwest clog bug. and I joined
Right.
Guiding Star Northwest because I loved the percussive element of it and loved
Yeah.
music. So, and my knees lasted through most of that. But, you know, in the end, I joined the band.
Right. Right. No, I haven't done. I've done odd bits of Northwest Border and all the other traditions at workshops at festivals, but I've never actually put clogs on or done Northwest seriously. I've fooled around at festivals, you know, so I know one or two, but I enjoy watching it, but I've never danced it. Yeah.
Do you have any? Have Okay, a couple of questions. Did you personally come with the team each time that they visited?
Not 1995 because I was just,
Oh, right, that's what you
you know,
said.
but yeah, every other time, yes.
Yeah, so you've had a lot of experiences with American teams, with the Marlboro Ale.
Yeah.
You must have a lot of friendships now with people over here, I'm assuming.
Yeah, well, Tim and Jan, I'm still in touch with quite regularly,
Yeah.
and um, the other bit was lovely when we came to Marlboro Ale, and I think this was our special treatment because we were a visiting team. We were actually then hosted by the Marlborough people in their homes after the ale. So we went back, and I'm still in touch with the people that looked after me the first time. In 1981, we stayed with Kent and Patty Webster, who they each danced with Marlborough. They now have grown-up family. In fact, they now have grandchildren. But when I met them, they had small toddly family, and I'm still in touch with them. And in fact, I think when we came over with our son, not on a Morris tour, we still went and stayed with Kent and Patty because they were just lovely hosts when I came over. And we did tend to get the people we stayed with, if possible, we stayed with them the next time round. So I know another of our team always stayed with Will Fielding, who was next door to Kent and Patty. So
Oh,
so we all got our little friendships with the people that had hosted us. And that was another magic bit about it, was doing the ale, but then we were just treated so royally by all the rest of Marlborough, who took us into their homes, and it was just wonderful.
hmm.
So that was why I always had a sort of magic element about it, just this the whole thing, that the ale itself, and then the friendships that came round as a result of it. Yeah.
Um, did you ever go to Pinewoods Camp?
To where?
Pinewoods Camp.
No, sorry, I didn't. Jen and Alan, who, as I say, formed the team, I think they came over and did a whole teaching week, maybe once, if not, certainly once, maybe twice. So they came over as teaching the English week, isn't it?
Yeah.
They did that. I think they're the only people from our team that ever came over as English.
So Pinewoods was, in those days, very much the place you had to go if you wanted to learn how to do Morris.
Yeah.
I don't know if Roy Dommett was traveling around yet then. I know he was distributing his sheets, among the young people who were interested, especially eventually going out to the West Coast, where I think Fred Brunig was for a little while.
It could have been.
Yeah, yeah. So I just wondered if
I think
you had experienced that. It was the place where people had to go.
yeah.
They met one another, they learned new dances, and then they took them all home with them.
Yeah.
And would you
Roy
say that?
taught there? I don't know. I suspect he came and taught there fairly early. Maybe late 60s. I'm not sure, because
Roy?
he was. I know he travelled across to the States a lot on business, And I think he always managed to find out where the Morris dancing was. And I mean, he had wonderful anecdotes about his trips to America.
Yeah.
He would probably have got himself to Pinewoods. And I think maybe Tubby Reynolds came over with him on one occasion and they taught together because they were a joint act. Tubby would play and Roy would demonstrate. And I suspect they taught at Pinewoods on at least one occasion.
I'm sure they did.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the way that Pinewoods here has been sort of this central place. Did you have a place at home where that kind of thing was happening?
Well, for us, the Mecca was always Sidmouth Folk Festival, which was probably the best festival for Morris dancing. And again, this is a wonderful bit of misogynist tradition. They had workshops, and again, Roy and Tubby always taught the Morris workshops in the 70s and 80s, and in about late 70s, Windsor were invited to come and run the women's ritual workshop. And we said, well, we don't do women's ritual dances. So we actually turned down the teaching, the prescribed. There were a few circle dances and things that were among the collected women's ritual. But we said, well, we're not a women's ritual Morris dancing team. We're dancing Cotswold Morris. So we turned down, and I think, unfortunately, the secretary at the time wrote a fairly blunt refusal. So I think we blotted our copybook a little bit for a year or two with the gurus at Sidmouth. But later on, we have been invited to teach workshops there in more recent past. But Sidmouth was wonderful. You could go there and you did, once we were allowed in, I mean, there was a skit. They wouldn't allow women into the workshops, the advanced workshops. The man running it just said, no, women can't come into the Morris workshops. They may sit at the side and watch, but they may not participate. This is late 70s. And Roy Dommett, bless him, came along and said, well, they can come to my workshops, I don't mind. So the workshops he was running, he was quite happy to have women in his workshop. So when he did them, we all turned up. But some of the workshops, they would not allow women to participate. It's changed. But so in late 70s, there was an issue about what you were allowed to go to and what you couldn't go to, which was terrible. Roy then was just wonderful and let us in. So you would go to a beginner's workshop, then you'd go to an advanced workshop, then you'd go down into town and do some pickup dancing outside one of the pubs. And then we'd go to the arena and watch the traditional dance, and maybe watch a bit more Morris dancing in the evening. And it was wonderful. That's how we met. You met so many friends that way. So that was probably the nearest thing to Pinewoods, where you had, for a whole week, you could do Morris workshops every morning. And they were fast and furious when Roy taught. So yeah, Sidmouth is probably the nearest thing to Pinewoods.
Hearing you talk about this, it sort of made clear to us how, well, you used the word refreshing when you came to Marlborough, seeing the women dance there in contrast to what you were experiencing at home. It's just made it, by your speaking about it and your experiences at home, your experiences at Sidmouth, and how much contrast there was.
There was one year at Sidmouth, I've forgotten, again, probably late 70s, and there was a T-shirt that a lot of the men from the Morris Ring wore, and it said, it had a little sort of dancing pig, and the slogan across the T-shirt was "Keep Morris Masculine," and you would just go around Sidmouth and all the men were wearing their T-shirt, "Keep Morris Masculine." It's just So we did have a few silly ones where we danced. We did a dance at one event, and looking back, it was all a bit childish. But we ended up dancing with fake moustaches and things, just try and.
Oh man. It's amazing that we survived the 70s. That's all I can say. The 60s and 70s, man. And
I think we were subject to just the sort of social attitudes of the time, and unfortunately, they were just concentrated in the male Morris ring. There were, I mean, because I became later secretary of the Morris Federation when it dropped the word women in the end because quite a few men's teams and mixed teams joined, so it became the Morris Federation, and I was secretary. And I was invited as an observer to the Morris Ring annual general meeting, which was quite interesting to go to. So I was the only woman in the whole meeting. But what was lovely was quite a lot of the men would just come up later and ask, well, what's it like in the Morris Federation? And individually, you found a lot of people had no problem with it. It was just there might be one person, a very strong character in some of the more traditional teams that drove the perceived attitude. And it wasn't the attitude of a lot of maybe the newer people that came in and thought, well, why are we doing this? So it was very gradual, and that was what we hoped to change by dancing well and, being nice to people and just socializing and getting on with people that way. And yeah, nudged away at it.
yeah.
And attitudes have changed. I think that's why probably our younger people just find it quite incredible that those attitudes took place. But
yeah.
Well,
Did you have a question, Susan?
Pardon me?
Did you have a question?
I'm just thinking about how Andy and Julie were talking about the impact of seeing Windsor Morris at the Marlboro Ale. And I think both Andy and Julie talked about how completely impressed they were. They said, here were they as a team trying to work so hard at dancing well and dancing together. And then they watched all of you and they said that just took it to a new level for us and gave us something to aspire to. So I think they're very kindred spirit teams at the time.
Yeah, well, it was a mutual admiration society.
Yes. Well, I think we're gonna wind down here a little bit, and I just wondered if, in your reflection before talking today, if you had, well, number one, anything particular you wanted to say about your experience as a member of Windsor at Marlboro, or perhaps any favorite story or favorite memory which would just help be part of the whole story of the Marlboro Ale from your perspective?
It's not exactly the ale, but I remember there was one dance we did where you had to do what we called a double leap, which was at the time reasonably challenging because one dancer leapt over the other, and then Cherry, who's our fool, tucked underneath, and so you ended up having to leap over and someone underneath her, and we perfected this. So I wasn't the person that was doing that bit, but I was the bend over. And I have this memory in the sort of shed or something. There was a sort of workshop room. And I remember Sue, Graham and I spent the whole morning practicing this double leap, because I think we were going to do it at New Fane, where the show dance is, and we just absolutely had to, and I was so terrified of getting this wrong. And I do remember just skulking into the shed and trying to practice quietly with nobody watching us. I think the main thing was just wonderful sense of the whole event, the whole thing. And New Fame was just the pinnacle of it all. And that was just the wonderful, all the crowd around, and just this amazing, it was just such a gorgeous venue without the Morris, and then all the Morris came in and people were sitting around on the slope and everybody so supportive, and just watching. I suppose I didn't realise, I think I might have said this until later, that it was pre-selected and that we were only seeing the creme de la creme of American Morris, and it was Tony's selections. So I mean, we thought all American Morris was just absolutely amazing because we didn't see any other stuff. Yeah, just I think just the sheer welcome we had, it was just wonderful. Yeah, it's lovely.
Did you want to add anything else, Susan?
Oops, me unmute myself. No, I just want to thank you, Beth, for sharing these memories, because it just, having attended the ale myself, I've experienced some of these things that you're describing, but it's lovely to hear it through your eyes and through the eyes of a Morris dancer from England, who there's sort of this, I think there's sort of this quiet reverence on the part of all of us dancing Morris over here of like, well, in England, they really know how to dance Morris. And what if they come here and see us dancing it and they think, what are they doing? So it's nice to hear that the mutual admiration went both ways. So
yeah,
it's all about
we're still trying to get over there. I keep plugging at it. I mean, I know we have a standing invite from Rhett, but it's very difficult because we have a number of teachers and the ale runs across teaching time here. So unless we have enough people, we can't come. So each year we sort of raise, and of course COVID, but each year we talk about trying to come, and I would like to do it once more before I stop dancing completely, but hey. Yeah.
That's exactly what Julian and Andy said. Last year the ale was all on Zoom. It was all virtual.
Yeah.
And this year, in large part, will be again, but they are hoping if, everyone is vaccinated to some degree in time, that they may do a local event.
Oh, be nice.
Which I hope will be filmed and shared in some way. So Andy and Julie definitely said exactly what you said. I hope that we are still dancing when we can dance all together again.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So what's going to happen now is that